Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Long Hill Chapel. I'm so glad that you're with us today on this beautiful day. It seems like we get one season one day and a new season the next day, and this is a beautiful day that you've chosen to come out to church, and we're really glad that you have. My name is Michael. I'm the lead pastor here at Long Hill. If you are a guest with us and you've chosen just to kind of set foot on this property for the first time and be here with us, we are just so glad that you have, and I truly hope that you experience a warm welcome from us here today. Well, today we begin a new series, and this is a simple idea that is incredibly difficult. This is a simple idea. Some of you are going to hear what I'm going to talk about. You're going to be like, oh, that's easy. I got that. I can go home and maybe skip the next couple weeks. But this is one of these things that is easy for us to understand, and it is much more difficult for us to do. Most of you remember this past Monday, we had something around here that we don't have all that often, and that was the eclipse, the solar eclipse that happened. And my family, my neighbor described us like this. She was talking about it. She's like, you guys are completists. You either do it or you don't do it. You don't sort of do it. That's kind of how we are. And we'd been talking about the eclipse for a while, and we decided as a family to pile all in the car and drive all the way up into the Adirondacks to see the eclipse. And so this wasn't just like going out on the roof or going out in the street and getting the funky glasses that what are we going to do with those now? We all have lots of them. We all got in the car. We went up Sunday night. We stayed a little north of Albany, New York, and then we went a couple hours farther into the Adirondacks to experience this thing that lasted like 3 minutes, like the totality, to be in the part where it gets completely dark. And as my kids were in the car, my two boys doing what boys do, as we're driving north, as we're sitting in traffic, there was a lot of me that was asking the question, is this worth it? Like, was this a good idea? Like, it seemed like a good idea when we were, in Millington, New Jersey. Now we're all the way up here. We're sitting in traffic. There's all these people. Are we even going to find a spot? Are we going to have to pull over by the side of the road? We're going to be on the New York State Thruway, like taking selfies about how we saw the eclipse from a highway. And I just started to ask all these questions. And we finally got to where we were going. It was this little town kind of clearing in the middle of really nowhere in the Adirondacks. And there were a bunch of other people there, probably a few hundred other people there in the middle of nowhere. And it kind of just did for a long time what it did here. The light got a little weird. It got a little cold. And I was like, I hope this is worth it. And then in like 10 seconds, it went from kind of sort of daytime to night. Like I've described it that the difference was literally night and day. I have pictures taken a few minutes apart. They could not be more different. And I will talk to you all afterwards about this. I can't explain the impact that just being there in this celestial event, this cosmic moment with other people as the sun was completely covered. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful. It was like nothing I've ever seen before, and it's in the top 5 things I've experienced in my entire life. And so as a result, we're really glad that we did that. But in order to do that, it required a stretch. It required us taking a step into uncertainty. And this is a small example of this, by the way, but a step into something we had not experienced that was actually kind of inconvenient to do. And so we inconvenienced ourselves in the hope that the stretch would be worth it. And here what we're going to talk about this week and for the next few weeks is this simple but profound idea that all of the best things in your life involve a stretch. All of the most important things in your life involve a stretch. All of the most significant things in your faith involve a stretch. Let me take it a step further. Everything that we do as a church that will truly matter 100 years from now will involve a stretch. It will involve us inconveniencing ourselves in the hope of something that we haven't quite seen yet. And sometimes it's as much what we're stretching away from as it is what we are stretching in the direction of. Now, there's some things that happen in the stretch. There's some things you don't get to take with you in the stretch. When you stretch away from something, you're leaving something behind. At the very least, it's a way of understanding the world. It's a way of understanding life. It's comfortability. As I was up there, in a hotel with my children in the Adirondacks, I couldn't go to the fridge. I could not even escape them. So I had left some things behind in the hope of what I was going to experience. And the great thing about this is that this isn't just like a spiritual thing. This isn't just like a Bible thing. This is a literal principle of life. This applies everywhere. So even if you're not a person of faith this morning, if you're here in the room or if you're watching online, this applies to your life. But when we apply this same thing to how we live out our faith, it has literally life-changing, world-shaking implications, and it's why it's such an important thing. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about how this affects you and your relationships with other people, how it affects how we are as a church. And what I mean by that is how we operate as a church, how we encounter people, how we encounter uncertainty, how we go forward into the future as a church. And it's going to impact where we're going. And now, I know you're sitting here and you're saying, you have not blown my mind yet, Michael. Like, I kind of get this. I kind of get the idea behind this. But the thing I really want to talk about today is that there's often a barrier that gets between us and the stretch. And so we understand what's at stake more when we have a better picture of what the stretch involves. And what is it? What is the stretch? What is that simply? It's simply this. It's when we trade comfort, or maybe another word you can use is we trade certainty for a level of discomfort or a level of uncertainty. It's when we trade something that's comfortable for us. And when I say comfortable, I don't necessarily mean good, I just mean familiar. So we trade something that we're familiar with, that's in some way comfortable, it's understandable, it's something we can wrap our arms around, it's something we know what to do with. And some of those things are good things, but some of those things are actually not good things, they're just familiar things. But it's when we trade that for the possibility of something different, the possibility of something greater, the possibility of something better. And there's always uncertainty and there's always discomfort involved in that. And some of you can look around your lives and you can see where you've done that. You've done that with your job. You had a job, but you traded it for an uncertain thing, for a different job. We just did that. My wife Grace just did that in our house. And so it's trading a good thing. It's trading an understandable thing for the hope of something better. Some of you as couples, you decided to have kids, and suddenly your time was not your own anymore, and your resources were not your own anymore. But the reason that you did that in all likelihood was because you were trading a known reality, a comfortable reality, for the possibility of something greater, for a bigger story, for meaning, for legacy. Some of you have moved. Some of you started a fitness routine, and you know that the stretch is at play in every single one of those places. Some of you serve here at Long Hill Chapel, and the reason you do that is not because you just have nothing better to do with your time. There are no people in this room who are just like, man, I have all this time, and I have no idea what I'm going to do with the time. I might as well wander over the church and see if there's something that I can do there. I came by yesterday when our facility care team was here, and they were literally taking like window panes out and washing them. It is the least glamorous thing I've ever seen in my life. And everyone I talked to had kind of that 1,000-yard stare. Because honestly, the last time those windows were washed, I was probably not an adult yet. And I'm not kidding. Like, we didn't even know that you can see through them. They're not like, you go downstairs, there's like sunlight that comes in the rooms now. It's unbelievable. And it's this simple thing that some people who care about this church gave of their time because they're investing in something that they believe matters. It's the stretch. And the reason that we always do this, when we do it, is because we can see just enough of the promise of a future. We can see just enough around the corner. We can see just enough of why this might make a difference, an outcome, a purpose that would be worth it. But against that optimistic view is something that pushes against us every single day, and it's the human condition. And here's what it is about the human condition. You and I like being comfortable. Who really doesn't like being comfortable in this room? Nobody. We all like comfort. We all have our different ways that looks. And here's the thing that makes this complicated, because I'm not here to say that comfort is bad. Comfort is good. Rest is good. Comfort is good for inspiration. It's great for recovery. Sometimes it's necessary for healing. But here's the thing I will tell you about comfort. It is never good for strength, and it is never good for growth. So it's good for a lot of things, but it's not good for everything. And here's where comfort gets complicated, because comfort has an expiration date. There's a time where comfort is good. There's a time where comfort becomes not good and even unhealthy. You know, we would all agree, and some of you do this and some of you don't, that it is a good thing to go to bed at a reasonable hour. But on the other side of that, it is also a good thing at some point to get up. Like if everyone stays in bed till noon the next day, there's a point at which, and it's different for some of you than others of you, where it suddenly isn't a good thing anymore. It's not a healthy thing anymore. If we did that every day, it would actually become unhealthy. So these things that we look to for comfort, these seasons in our life that we experience for comfort, they're good, they can have purpose, but they also have an expiration date. Think about it like this. Think about if you laid on the couch all the time. Some of you, that just sounds like the best thing ever. But if you did it like all the time, like day after week, after month, after year, it's good for a while. It's not good forever. And if you do it for too long, it actually stops being healthy and helpful and becomes unhealthy. When I was in college, I had this pillow. And it was the pillow I had on my bed, and you know, it wasn't like a regular pillow, it was like a pillow, like a throw pillow off a couch. And for some reason, I had adopted this pillow as the pillow that I used every night. And so this pillow went with me from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 to year 4. I don't think I ever washed it. It was comfortable, but at some point it actually became disgusting. And so when I graduated college, I threw away some of you are very happy to hear that I threw away the pillow. But this all kind of goes in the direction, and here's kind of where this is encapsulated. Comfort is a healthy thing when it's part of our lives. It's an unhealthy thing when it becomes our life. As a church, comfort is a healthy thing when it's part of our reality. When we come in here and we're restored and we're renewed and we're inspired, and some of you come in for a season of healing and you need that, and we are here for that. But if that's all we're here for, at some point it becomes unhealthy. Let me stretch this just a little bit further. Comfort, as it comes to our understanding of what we are called to as the people of God. If we stay where we understand everything, where everything makes sense, where we know, who the people in the white hats and the black hats are, and we know, what we're for and what we're against, and it's clean and it's tidy and it runs like this well-oiled machine, if that becomes our reality for too long as a church, it actually has the ability to become unhealthy. Because there's ways and there's things and there's patterns of living and there's seasons that are comfortable, but when we get past their expiration date, they cease to be that. And this is true in our lives, it's true in our relationships, it's even true in our church. Some of you have ways, maybe it's with a significant other, it's someone you're dating or even someone you're married to. They're comfortable, but they're not healthy. They're comfortable for you, but they're not healthy for where you're going. And they've passed their expiration date. And the Spirit of God is calling you onward. He's calling you into the stretch. He's calling you to take a step which will feel unnatural because, honestly, you kind of like it the way it is. But he's calling you into a step into the future. There's this thing about God and his ways. I forget who actually said this, but they said something, it was about preaching, but I think it's actually true about how God interacts with us. God comforts the afflicted, but he afflicts the comfortable. So when we're afflicted, when we're going through suffering or struggle in our lives, I believe that the Spirit of God is there to comfort us. But there's also a time when the people of God get very comfortable with the way that they are and the way that things are. And at that point, God actually begins to serve a different purpose in our lives. And we really, I don't like this. We don't like this, but it's for our good, and it's for the good of what God is doing in the world. Oftentimes, the only way we get jolted out of this is when we're past our expiration date, is when there's something that comes into our life where the pain of staying the way that we are becomes greater than the pain of change. Some of you were very comfortable with how you were living your life, and then you went to the doctor and they told you a thing and it forced you to change all of your habits. I've been there. I'm still there in some ways. That is not comfortable for me. But the reality of staying where we are is more painful than the reality of making the change. Sometimes that's the only time we get to that. We resist this. We even pray against it at times because it's not to that point yet. Because our present vision of things, our present understanding of things, it's comfortable. Sometimes it's this. You can't see around the corner enough yet. You are here because you know there's something out there, but you can't see enough of it that you're willing to go around the corner because you don't know all the details. You can't see the final picture. You don't know how it works out. You know there's risk involved, and you don't know where that lands. So here's the thing I believe that's always true about God. It's true in your life. It's true in your relationships with others. It's true in this church and how we operate. And it's true with where God is taking us forward. It's this. God is always on the move. I think one of the songs we sang this morning was talking about that. God is always on the move. Even in the world where we're not sure how all these pieces fit together and it seems uncertain, God is on the move. And I believe God wants to move here. I believe he is moving here, but I believe he wants to do more of it. He didn't call us to this point for us to get comfortable, to kind of set up shop and say, hey, this is great. We're just going to keep doing this exactly the way we're going to do it. But the thing we don't want to do is we don't want to stay where God is moving on. We don't want to stay in a place or an understanding or a mindset or in our own lives a pattern that has gotten comfortable, and God is calling us out. I believe that the reality of how much of God's work, how much of God's move in our lives in this place we will see is largely defined by our level of desire to not settle for the way things are. It'll be defined by how much our desire is there to say, I believe there's more. I believe God has more for me. I believe God has more for my relationship. I believe God has more for me in the place that he's put me in life, with my resources, with my positioning, in my community, and yes, in this church, than I've seen, and I don't want to miss it. And so today we're going to look, as I said, this is a profoundly simple concept that is profoundly difficult. It's profoundly challenging for us. I want to show you how this works out in one of the earliest stories in the gospel. It's where Jesus is beginning to call his disciples out, and they start to join him on the path and follow him and get kind of in the line of the ministry and the vision and the things that God is up to in the world. And it's in Matthew chapter 4, beginning in verse 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. That seems kind of obvious. So they have an identity and they're doing a thing. If you were a fisherman, you grew up in this trade. You did this thing, your father probably did it, your kids were probably going to do it, and so there's a level of certainty to it. It was not the most glamorous profession, as you might imagine, but it was a very consistent job. It was something that you do day in and day out for all of your life. And so there's this identity that they have, and Jesus shows up. Verse 19, and he says this, "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." So Jesus shows up and he speaks into the thing that they know, but he gives it a different meaning and a different vision. Watch what they did, verse 20. At once they left their nets and they followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father, who was Zebedee, preparing their nets. So you have that generational fishing thing going on. Jesus called to them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And so we love this story when we read it. Maybe you were in Sunday school and you read it, and it's just like, hey, they're there, they're doing some fishing. And it's like, hey, let's go do something else for a while, and they just go follow Jesus. This was an incredible stretch for these men, because they had a certainty, they had an understanding, they thought they knew what their lives were about. They thought they knew what they were made for, and then Jesus shows up. And they leave what they're doing, and they leave the identity that they have. And so the stakes here are actually incredibly high. A few things I think we see in this passage. To follow Jesus where Jesus is going, you have to let go of the comfortable way that things are. Look what it says. It says they left their nets. They left something behind as they embraced the stretch. Jesus meets you. He doesn't leave you. He goes with you, but you still need to leave some things behind on the way. When you follow Jesus, he takes something you already know and he remakes it. He says, I'll send you out to fish for people. Here's what I want us to not miss here, all of us here in this room. Who you are and how you are and the place God has put you and the things he's made you passionate about and the people he's put around you, that's where he wants to begin. He's not calling you all into ministry so you can leave your jobs, and go be pastors and missionaries. Maybe a few of you, he is doing exactly that. But most of us, he's saying there's this way that you've seen and understood your life, the way you've seen and understood your work, your passion, your positioning, your resources, that I want to remake to do something that is so much greater with. Here's where this gets difficult for us. When Jesus calls us into this, he doesn't leave those things undisturbed. He doesn't leave them just the way they are, just with Jesus. We would love that. We love the idea of I get all the things in my life and I also get Jesus on top of it. Jesus doesn't leave those things undisturbed. And we have to leave some things behind. And one of those things that we leave behind is our comfort. Here's the other, this might ruffle a couple feathers, so I'm just giving you that in advance. You can use the Connect card to write, angry notes to me if you want. It's also in the app. You can do that there too. Following Jesus is urgent and immediate. It has an element of immediacy and urgency. Look at the two words in the passage. It says, at once they left their nets. At once they left their nets. Later on it says, Jesus called them and immediately they left the boat. When you hear Jesus calling your name, don't hesitate. And one of the things that's interesting about this passage is not really here, but when you put the gospel accounts next to each other, there's this man Simon called Peter, who, if you've been around church long enough, this is one of the disciples that we probably know a little bit more about. We talked about him a couple weeks ago at Easter. But as you put the accounts next to each other, you discover that this was not Peter's first encounter with Jesus. It's actually his second. And so there was this first time where Jesus comes along and he comes calling and Peter's like, nope, not going to do it. And then in this account, he's had a change of heart and he does the thing immediately. And that is such good news for us, Because sometimes Jesus has come and he's called and we knew he was doing it and we weren't, for whatever reason, the stretch, we just didn't make the stretch, and we're looking back and saying, man, I woulda, coulda, shoulda. There's a sense of regret. The good news is God is more faithful than we are. He's more faithful than we are. He comes back. He comes again. And he gives us the chance to go and step into what he has. So when you hear Jesus calling your name about something, and that might be personal, that might be very small, it might be a change that you know he's calling you to make in your life. It might be the way that you've been doing your relationship and you know that there's a change, but the cost feels high because it will cause you to leave your comfort. Or maybe how you've seen your life or your resources or what you've been living for. God is calling you somewhere and you're just, I don't know, this just seems like too much. Don't miss it. Don't hesitate. It might not be a big step, but it might be the first of many little steps. It might be the first step on a long journey. There's always movement involved. Now here's the part where I'm going to rub a couple of you the wrong way. Make sure that praying is not an excuse for stalling. Make sure that praying, we should all pray, we should take things to God, but make sure that it's not an excuse for stalling. Make sure that what we're not doing when we say, I need to go pray about this. You do need to go pray about this, but at some point you need to act in faith. A lot of times, I'll speak for myself, when I say that, what it really is me trying to buy space away from the urgency of the moment. Waiting out, we have to wait out our emotions. We have to hear from God. We have to take it before God, but we also need to consider why God has intersected our lives in that moment the way that he has. Make sure that that's not a way to get away from what God might be calling you to do. Here's what I believe is true. I'd love, and I honestly think, I don't want to speak for God, but I think God would love to see a few more bold and perhaps mistaken steps of faith in his direction. He would love to see some people who took a step, and then maybe they look back and said, maybe I didn't understand this correctly, but they were willing to take the step of faith rather than just figuring out a way to sit this one out. The intersection of the call and where you are right now. Do you think for a moment that's accidental? So there's something that God is calling you to, and there's this moment that he's calling you in. Do you really think that's because you ate some sketchy pizza last night? Or is there more to it than that? I think about all those folks. If you were here and you were doing windows yesterday, I applaud you. Do you think any of those people who probably their backs all hurt today, when they saw the need, were like, you've called me out upon the waters, and they had this massive spiritual moment? No, there was a need, and there was availability, and they stepped into it. And friends, that is where God is honored. Because some of the first steps on the journey that God is taking us on in our lives are profoundly not glamorous. They're profoundly uncertain. We don't see why this matters yet, but they're the most important ones. So when we step into the stretch, we'll leave things behind. This will raise a lot of questions with people. The people in the world around us won't get it when we do these things. Why would you take a week of your vacation to go on a mission trip in the Dominican Republic? That's not comfortable. That's not easy. Why would you do that? Why would you give sacrificially? I was talking to someone in this church who give sacrificially here at Long Hill because they believe it's an act of worship. And this person literally said this to me. They said, the difference between me doing this and not doing this is probably me living in a different neighborhood. That's profound. But they know that God has blessed them and called them to do it because they believe that it matters. Now, as I said, some of you, who've been in faith for a long time, you're like, this seems really simple. We just did the book of Romans. That was great. There was a lot of theology. We talked about, the Greek language, and there was all these concepts, and we talked about, atonement theory, and it was such a good time. And some of you are like, thank God that's over. But this seems so simple to some of us. This is simple and hard because what I promise you, each one of you, every one of us, there's a place for us in here where God is calling us into this that we haven't stepped into yet. We haven't stepped into it yet. So what's a tool that we can use? How can we lean into the stretch? Let me give you two words. They're complicated words. I'll explain them in a moment. Cultivate discontinuity. Cultivate discontinuity. It's an intentional choice of words. When you cultivate something, you're intentional and disciplined about it over time. Some of you are gardeners in this room. I am a terrible gardener because I'm not good at cultivating. I'm good at planting and leaving and hoping something good happens. But cultivating is going out day after day after day. It's watering, it's pulling weeds, it's making sure that the light and the sun is right. You are disciplined and you're intentional about creating these spaces over time. And discontinuity is every time there's a break in the status quo. It's when you are actually creating breaks in your life. You're creating interruptions in your life that God can use. Are you so tightly scheduled that there's no room for any interruption to what you're doing? Because I promise you that God is waiting for you in the interruptions. He's waiting for you in the places where you make a break with how things are so that you can embrace something different. You actually make space. You say, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to stop spending this. I'm going to create this time. I'm going to stop this activity because I believe in faith that God is going to do something better in the space that I've created. There's a couple of you in this room, you've done something and you've even served in a ministry and you've done it for a long time and you stopped doing it so you could experience what God wanted to do in your heart because that was more important. That's a great example of cultivating discontinuity. Every time I've seen someone's faith grow, every single time, it's because they've embraced a discontinuity. I won't bore you with the story of me coming back to this church, and I didn't really want to do it, and most of you have heard that, and I'm so glad that I'm here now. But it was because I stepped into something that felt like a stretch. It wasn't what I thought I wanted to do. It wasn't what I thought God was calling me. But it was an opportunity that was at an intersection in front of me. And some of you have had things like that as well. So we get comfortable with good things, but we also get comfortable sometimes with things that we ought to start getting uncomfortable with. We ought to just start getting uncomfortable with some things that we've called comfortable. Every time I've seen someone's faith grow stronger, it's when they've embraced that discontinuity. They've started a relationship. Some of them have ended a relationship that's comfortable, but it's unhealthy. They've looked in their life and they've said there's some expired seasons of comfort, just like the milk in your fridge that has passed the expiration date, that it's time to move on and move out. It's when people have started giving sacrificially. They've started serving in a place that stretches them, that they don't feel called to, but that stretches them. It's when we face the pain that we're carrying around. We face our complacency. We turn and we dismantle our idols, the things that we've set up as God in our lives. We decide to stop sinning. We decide to stop sinning. We say, you know what? I've been able to rationalize it and justify it, and I know that God forgives me, and I pray for that all the time, but I'm just going to stop. There's this thing I know I ought not to be doing anymore, and I'm going to stop doing it. And I'm going to pray that the Spirit of God gives me the strength to continue in that. It's when we make our faith have consequences. But think about it this way, because this kind of all sounds negative, right? It's like all the stuff you have to give up. And I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, and we had youth group, and most of us loved listening to secular music. And we'd have to burn our tapes in the campfire at the end of camp. I don't know if any of you did that. Maybe I'm just working some of my own issues out. But we think about this in terms of what we have to give up. But I want you to think about it this way. What could we be missing out on? What could we be missing out on by staying in a comfortable place and holding on to whatever it is that we don't want to let go of? What could you be missing by staying where you are? What could you be missing by staying how you are? What could we as a church be missing when we say there's a pretty good thing? There's enough people here, the lights generally stay on. It's a little tricky sometimes, but we like the music well enough. Our kids have a good time. The facility feels like it's in a little better shape. What could we be missing out on by staying in that place that God wants to do? Our ability to grow is our key to life. It's when we stop doing that, we begin dying. And just like my experience with the eclipse, think about the most important, most significant, most amazing experiences that you've had. Maybe they weren't the easiest or the most fun, but they were the most important. How many of them were comfortable when you got started? There's an author, his name is John Acuff, and he wrote this, and I really like how he said it. He said, I want growth without discomfort, but that's not how it works. Growth is always uncomfortable. And this isn't just about our lives. This is about this church. It's about the place that God is taking us next. I remember when COVID happened here. And we did all sorts of crazy stuff. Some of you, we had church out in the lawn, and we had some tents, and we had some heaters, and you watched online, and we had some cameras here, and it was just this crazy time. And I don't miss that time at all. We adapted. But you know what? God has not called us to a place where we have arrived. He's not brought us here to say, hey, you're good, just keep doing that. He's always moving. But he always goes with us along the way. We will miss the call of Jesus if we choose in the direction of our comfort. You'll miss it. And the thing that feels comfortable will actually become unhealthy, and then it will become uncomfortable. And I personally don't want to live that kind of life. And as a church, I don't want us to be that church, and I don't believe that you do either. Comfort is a healthy thing when it's part of our life. It becomes unhealthy when it becomes our life. So as we close today, where is Jesus calling? Maybe I'll use this word. Where's Jesus inviting you into the stretch? Where's he inviting you into the stretch? Maybe it's with your life. Maybe it's some area of your life, and you sort of know already. But it's just going to require you to get up, to move away from a comfortable place, to embrace a discontinuity with the hope that around the corner that there's something better. And only afterwards do we see that it was worth it. I look back on my eclipse story that I told you last Sunday at this point. I was not like, yes, this is going to be great. But now I'm glad. But it takes us leaning in to the stretch. It takes us doing that, stretching into obedience, trusting that God meets us every step of the way. Let's pray. God, as we lean into this series in the next few weeks, as we look at how this concept, this simple idea that's profoundly challenging to us in a lot of ways. It's simple to understand, it's much harder to do. Would your Spirit be at work? Would it be at work in my heart, but would it be at work in our hearts individually? Would it be at work in our corporate gathering, as our heart as a church, as we look at where you're taking us, we look at where you've brought us from, and we look at how we're kind of doing these things and going forward? Would we carefully examine not only where you're calling us to embrace the uncertainty of discomfort for what you might want to do, but would you prick our hearts and our minds just enough so that we wouldn't want to miss out on everything you will do if we lean into the stretch? I pray that you would make this just a profoundly transformative season for us as people, as a community of faith, for where you're going to take us next. And we know, we trust, that even when we leave our nets behind and we follow you, that we go with you and you go with us. You give us the strength. You give us the courage. You give us yourself as we lean into the stretch. Thank you for this time that we've had together. I pray all these things in Jesus' name.